Morning, church family. Sue Buckwalter here. Time for our children's lesson. You know what time it is, children. Gather up your friends and family members and your dogs and pets and sit down for our lesson. If you're here in the sanctuary, dial in, kids, and listen to see what the Lord might have to say to you today through our lesson. All right, today I wanted to talk to you about strength. Well, strength is something that a lot of us think about when we're trying to move something really heavy or something big. We kind of might look for help from somebody who has big muscles to help us. Well, I'm going to show you an illustration about strength not really being about the size of something. So how many of you kids have ever heard the phrase, it's not the size of the dog in a fight that matters, but the size of the fight in a dog that matters? Probably most of your parents have heard that phrase before. So here's a little lesson I'm going to give you to start with. I have this apple right here, and I just have an ordinary straw. Now, an ordinary straw that's just made of plastic doesn't seem like a very strong piece of equipment, does it? Well, I'm going to show you how I can take this straw and I can put it into this apple. Now, typically, you wouldn't think you could put a straw through an apple, right? Well, watch what happens when there we go. Look, you can put a straw into an apple. It's basically a little trick on the mind because typically you couldn't do that, but when you cover the end of the straw, it creates a pressure that is greater inside the straw than inside the apple, and you can puncture an apple. Well, today's story I want to share with you today is about one of our Bible characters named David. Well, David was a shepherd boy, and this story is about him and Goliath. Well, David was the youngest member of his family, and he had older brothers. His three oldest brothers had gone off to a war with the Philistines, and they were fighting with King Saul against the Philistines. And David would go back and forth between the battlefield and his parents' house, or his dad's, and he would take care of the sheep. Well, David one day had gone out and he heard Goliath shouting out all these threats against the Israelites. Well, Goliath was this big man. He was over 9 feet tall, the Bible tells us. 9 feet tall. Can you imagine, kids? I'm only about 5'3", so 9 foot tall, that seems like really tall to me. Like Pastor Paul is super tall to me. He's like 6'4". And Goliath was even taller than Pastor Paul. Can you believe that? So Goliath was taunting the Israelites for 40 days and nights. Every evening and every morning, he would come out and he would give threats against the Israelites and he would insult them. Now, the Bible tells us that he had really heavy-duty armor, too. So not only was Goliath a big, big man, but he had a bronze helmet, and he had like this coat of armor on. He had these things on his legs. They were all made of bronze and very heavy. He had a spear and a javelin and a sword. He had everything to make him look very intimidating, and he was very intimidating indeed. Plus, he had a big attitude, and he was super arrogant, and he came out and defied Israel all those days. And you know, I'm sure the Israelites got real tired of being put down every day by this big giant. Well, King Saul offered a big reward to anybody who could kill this giant, to take this giant down. Well, one day, David happened to be there on the battlefield bringing supplies to his brothers, and he's like, well, what's going on here, and the oldest brother told him, you should just go on home, don't worry about this, leave this to the big guys. Well, David, of course, being the youngest child, didn't listen to his older brother, and he still poked his nose around and found out what was going on. And eventually, David ends up having this conversation with King Saul about the Philistine named Goliath. And you know what David did? David was like, you know what? God delivered me from a bear and a lion. And you know what? I am certain God will deliver me from this Philistine. And you know what? David had that courage because it came from God. He had that strength inside of him that said, you know what? If God is with me, I can do anything. And you know what? They're like, okay, David, I guess we'll go along with this. And they put armor on David, and they tried to kind of make him look stronger than what he was. Well, David's just a shepherd boy, you remember, at this point in the story, not a warrior yet. And he takes off the armor and says, I'm not used to that. I can't wear that. So he takes out his slingshot and his 5 stones. And you know what? He gives one of the best speeches, I believe, in the Bible. One of my favorite speeches that's given in the Bible. And it goes like this. David comes out and he says to Goliath, "You come against me with spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I will strike you down and cut off your head." I'm like, yeah, David, go, man. I love that speech because he just really embraced the power of God right there, didn't he? And he did not back down. And Goliath is kind of like, why do you send this little dog after me with little sticks to try to take me down? Well, David showed him a thing or two about the power of God, didn't he? Because we know what the rest of the story is about then. David killed the giant with one small stone to the forehead of his head. And Goliath underestimated the power of God, and David defeated him. Well, boys and girls, strength isn't always about size, is it? Strength can come from the Lord in situations we have in our lives, can't it? The Bible tells us in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7, "The Lord does not look at the things man does. Man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart." And that's why David was chosen to be the king of Israel eventually. And boys and girls, sometimes God puts a Goliath in your life. Sometimes there's a big giant that you have to conquer. And you know what? I think sometimes God puts those Goliaths in our lives so we can embrace that inner David spirit that he has given all of us, that we can trust God to deliver us from those big Goliaths we have in our lives. So boys and girls, this week when you have a big Goliath, it might not be somebody who's 9 feet tall with heavy-duty armor on. It might be something like somebody that's picking on you at school or something like that. It might be something that seems really small. But pray to God, and he will help you through any of those big Goliaths in your life. All right, boys and girls, have a great week. Bye for now.